How are you? Welcome to Thursday, which means we get to blind taste a wine together. This little number right here. Who is out there tonight on this rainy, stormy evening in the shoulder season between summer and fall? Ooh, that's lovely. That's fun. It sort of smells summery. Peach skin and just happiness. Well, hope everybody had a great week. We did, getting into the mix of our services now, having been back for about 2 weeks from the closure and getting the kitchen operationalized and our new entryway operationalized. We're still waiting on a few little details to be finalized from all that work, but by and large, the response has been great. So thank you to all of you who've come in and shared your feedback. Thank you to those that have made some note online as well. But for this week, excited to begin making some transitions in the menu. You know, we're starting to see some fall squashes already coming this way. Really, it resulted in the end of tomato season, so we don't have much in the way of tomatoes anymore, and we're shifting out of corn and into new things, anticipating Brussels sprouts and working on a new sun-choke dish for our present menu. So it's just a really kind of cool time of year, and it's that time of year too where wine, right? You go from desperately wanting rosé and crisp, kind of refreshing whites to thinking like, I could go for something with some spice and some texture, and you know, a medium plus bodied wine red would be fun and nice, and maybe we're going to grill and it's going to just have a little bit more weight to it. So it's just a great time of year. I think this is one of the best. Transitions are sometimes challenging because you hearken for one thing and then want to the next, and you're not at either, but I think you get to enjoy both, and that's what's nice about this particular moment in time. Also nice is the fact that we're being joined by Candy and Lorna and Craig and Kristen and Johnny. Trish, Andy, and Kathy are with us. And Jonathan, you are in Mob Jack, Virginia. Where is that? I don't know that particular area. So hopefully it's a nice place, the great vantage. And did you bring the wine with you? Susan Crandall's joining us tonight, which is great. Hello, Susan. I know the Burses dropped by and grabbed a wine. I don't know if Kathy will be joining us or not. Richard is in the hospital, so if she doesn't, at least let's all send a positive note his way, an intentional thought from all of us to head that way. Kathy, you're here. Great. Well, Kathy, please give Richard my best. I'm hoping he's doing well, going through all of the work that's being done in the hospital on his behalf. So 3 hours southeast of DC, Jonathan. That sounds interesting. Cool. Well, hope you're having a great time. Ariel and Matt, the 6-year-old who said, I just heard Brussels sprouts is hanging out with Ariel and Matt. That's a well-trained, a well-exposed 6-year-old. I love that. We're looking at, you know, we hearken to the time of Brussels sprouts from the past 2 seasons ago, and now are wanting to do them again, and probably will do them kind of in a similar fashion, at least preparation-wise, frying them up. They're so tasty. So that'll be back in the world. So Jonathan, you've got 6 weeks of, so you have it great. So you're playing along with the wine. That's perfect. Rob and Kathy are on vacation in the North Carolina mountains, so we are traveling. This is great. The Bletts are here. Hello, hello. Stephen and Nicole and the Swanbergs, wonderful. Pandemic hideout. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm seeing more and more of what was the beginnings of a pandemic hideout for a lot of our guests. Became more of a semi-permanent / question mark permanent stationing place. I was talking to a guest last week who did that. He decamped for the pandemic and began working remotely when it was time, and then now is not going back. And so a lot of changes have happened for all of us as a result of this, and I think in that regard, it's bringing a lot of people to a better place, a more enjoyable place. So, I mean, at this point, you can access our wine and you can bring it anywhere in the world and join us on a Thursday night. It's pretty amazing. So, Kathy's saying he's doing okay. He wasn't here to open your wine, but you managed to grasp it between your legs, hold it, and open it one-handed. Oh gosh, you guys have gone through a rough patch from your shoulder to his admittance in the hospital. I do wish you well, and I'm sure we all do. All right, guys, happy Thursday, as Chris, Shirley, and Courtney chime in too. What do we got here? This is a pretty expressive wine, right? So it's white. Where does it sit in the color spectrum? Is it kind of a pale wine? Does it have a moderate intensity, or is it very intense in way of its color? And then the same kind of question for the aroma. What is it presenting? Is it a muted wine? Is it a wine that you have to struggle to find something to talk about from the nose perspective? Is it something that's just sort of got a few things going on, or is it extraordinarily expressive? Craig's swinging and going for the fences. Clear, deep, golden, and butterscotch. Nice. Very nice. It is clear. It is deeper and golden. It has a butterscotchy kind of even color. Yeah, it definitely has that sheen to it. And then power of suggestion, I think I was thinking I smelled butterscotch too. Maybe a hint of it. Okay, so how about general appearance? What are we seeing for it in the way of the legs? It's forming, and they're moving slow-ish, right? So we're talking probably 13 plus, 13.5, 13, maybe all the way up to 14. Johnny, you're picking up a hint of green. I think my table, I don't have a white in front of it too. I get an amber element because of the table that I'm looking at it on. You can see that's got a brownish element to it. So I'm not getting that tint of green, but possible. Certainly if you're getting that pale, I got a more golden color to mine. Kathy wasn't going that dark on the golden side. I do have like a polished gold sort of sheen to this. It's not golden through and through, but it has a little bit of that. Light yellow for Jan. Susan, you did a Dordogne in southwestern France webinar today, so are you thinking we're talking about Semillon kind of Sauvignon Blanc situation? Defined legs, I agree, Johnny. They start slow, then they take off. Exactly right. They form kind of that rim and then pierce the rim and form a little tear and then shoot into a leg. And that tells you we're looking at maybe a little bit higher alcohol. And I think the aroma, the fact that it's very expressive, is giving us a sense of that too. Some of this light, medium variation on golden. We're not talking about something that's super pale, kind of green, or watery looking, right? So I think that's giving us a sense that this wine has some skin that is a little bit sun-kissed and a little bit richer and a little bit thicker. So that's an indication that we might be talking about certain varieties over others. Yeah, Jonathan, I think we will venture to say, if you're looking at this mostly in the dark, kind of sitting on a porch or something, not going to carry a whole bunch of weight from your comments about the visual, but that's okay. We'll look for you for other comments. 14 karat gold. Jan, you just nailed it, right? That's it. Perfect. That's excellent. And no green for Susan, right? So let's talk a little bit about the nose. To go with that kind of weighted expression, what do you smell? Looking for a few things. We're looking for fruit, earth, and wood. F-E-W, we're looking for a few things. On the fruit side of the spectrum, what do you see? What do you smell, excuse me? What's jumping out? Are you getting... Kathy, you're saying a little bit lower than 13 points alcohol? All right. I mean, that slow forming element and that kind of color and richness, it's possible. I mean, 13, so we're saying 12.5 to 13.5 maybe as a profile. We'll see a little bit more as we kind of taste this and find out. Peach, green apple. Get that butterscotch comment from before. I like the peach comment. A blossomy white peach. Thank you, Chris, Shirley, and Courtney right there on cue. Yeah, that's lovely. Where do you get peach? Banana from Kristen, yes. And Johnny smells texture, and I love that comment because there are elements where we parse out our sensorial capability, and when we do so, we put it into a smell camp, into a visual camp. But there's an all-encompassing sort of sensorial experience that you can feel, intuit, sense, something more. This is going to have a weight. It tastes blue. It has an electricity to it. Those kind of comments don't necessarily fit into one of the sensorial boxes, which is fine. It helps, I think, to illuminate a broader exposure and a broader experience with the wine, and that can oftentimes lead to more enjoyment, I think, too. Green orchard fruit, white peach, white flowers, a tad of nuttiness on the nose. The peach comment's getting some traction from others. An orange blossom, I like that. White flowers, apricot, lemon peel, nutmeg, something earthy. Does this sound like we're talking about Viognier? I think we should consider that, perhaps. Peggy and Chris are here. Hi, guys. Welcome. Thank you for joining. And what else should we be considering, just based on the descriptors that we put out so far, the nose and the visual of the palate? What do you see? What would smell creamy? What kind of a wine would have that experience and provide that? That aromatic orange blossom element. Not a very nice comment, Chris, you're saying, but a little watered down to you, maybe a prohibition wine. Interesting. Oh, cool. Jonathan's throwing out Falangina. It changes as it warms up. This is warm for me too. This isn't quite chilled, and that's part of what maybe is giving me this perception. I haven't tasted this yet, so some of the floral and spice, maybe Treminette, Kathy's noting. Pinot Gris. Okay. There is some spice here too, yeah. Maybe you're talking about a blend, possibly. But Treminette can give you that spice. Any residual sugar as you taste this? Where's the acidity at? Is this a dry wine, an off-dry wine, a medium wine, a sweet wine? And Chris, I like the idea you're throwing out there too, Torrontés. Torrontés giving us some of that floral note, a little bit of that spice. It is spicy. What kind of spice are you picking up, Robert? And by saying that, are you talking about like jalapeno, spiciness of a pepper? Are you talking about a tropical kind of spiciness in the way of like a habanero? Are you talking about spice in the way of the actual spices that you might find in a spice cabinet? Holiday spices, cloves, cinnamon, things like that. Where do you find the spice? Is it black peppery spicy? Not likely. White peppery spicy? And Susan, didn't Tony say these would stretch our wine brains? Yes, he did. He said to look out for the next couple. It's very dry or off dry, and we have 2 comments on that, and that's great. Let's talk about this. Dry from another, off dry from another, so it's confusing that way. A lot of this fruit, Arnais and Falangina were 2 varietals that Jonathan's throwing up, so I'm going to hit on these things before we lose them. Going rogue with ferment. Very cool. A ferment from Hungary, one of the grapes that you'd find in the 2-grape blend usually that is made into Tokai, a sweet, late harvested Botrycized type wine. Joe Saffer, hey sir, how are you? This is great. Wonderful, welcome to you, sir. So nutmeg and white pepper, picking up those spices on this. We have dry and off dry, so let's sit with that for just a moment. That creamy sensation fills the mouth with this apricot, this peach, and this spice, and then it lingers, and there's this flirtatious lingering at the end. And is it sweet or is it alcohol? And this is a good example of where I think it's more on the dry side. It makes you salivate a little bit, so it's got a pretty amount, a decent amount of acidity, and it lingers in that way that, like xylitol is an alcohol-derived sugar in gum, can be sweet, but it's more of an alcohol element. It's got this tiny bit of gentle heat that's present in the finish that I think is more alcohol than I think is sugar. So think about the viscosity of, say, vodka on your palate and how it kind of tingles a little bit, and then think about honey and the difference of how that honey would have an actual sugar sweetness that the alcohol doesn't have. It's derived in sort of the same way by way of sugars, but it's just a different presentation. And I think there's a little bit more of a dryness to this wine than it presents, if that makes sense. It's getting quite tropical. Yeah, it's not super alcoholic, Jeff and Adrian, but I think there's a little bit there. Yeah, very cool descriptor there, Johnny, for sure. Taking a little bite of ginger before you have sushi. This has a little bit of that kind of quality, a pickled ginger, but the pickled ginger is also sweetened. And so you have this sweet, sour element at play on the palate. The ABV is not high, but I don't know. I think I'd be surprised, and I have been wrong before, if this was in the 12.5 to 13 camp and more in the 13.5 kind of camp. Medium acid. And Jonathan, your question about Chardonnay is a good one. We're considering Viognier, considering Torrontés, and Falangina, and we were looking at Traminet, right? So varietals that have aromatic profile and a little bit of spice. Pinot Gris was thrown in there. Can we eliminate Chardonnay? I think we can, although a lot of the descriptors from the palate and from the nose and the appearance, we couldn't have, and we shouldn't have eliminated Chardonnay based on that point. I think we can taste it and say, not likely on the camp of Chardonnay. You could find examples probably somewhat, it would have some of the profile here, but not all of them. And so I think you could take a Chardonnay away. Auxerrois or Pinot Blanc coming from Chris Shirley and Courtney. Interesting. So that kind of plays off when Jan said Pinot Gris. I wasn't thinking Pinot Grigio. I was thinking definitely more Pinot Gris Alsace kind of a presentation, and some of that spice coming through, a little bit more of the weight coming through as well. Green apple. Are you getting that on the palate, Jan, or getting that on the nose? We had a little bit of that on the nose before. Because of the acidity and where it's at, I don't know that I could go or stick with Viognier. It just doesn't have kind of enough of the roundness without the acidity to be that. Pinot Gris is still an interesting call from Pinot Gris more than Pinot Blanc, I think, from Alsace would be an interesting call. Diesel and petrol? Interesting. Is there a hit, guys? Are you picking up any diesel petrol on the finish? Chris is saying he doesn't get the viscosity he gets in a Viognier. I can see that too. I think we had some of that. I got a mid-palate weight to this that I think I'm picking up in a way that's a bit richer than some, and that's, I think, because it's not quite chilled the same way as probably some of yours. Candy's asking the specific one-word question, whether or not we're thinking New World or Old World, and thus driving us potentially to Virginia. And that's interesting. So from Kathy's first great suggestion of Traminet, absolutely could be Traminet from Virginia. Would we have Pinot Gris from Oregon, Pinot Gris from Alsace? Would we have Traminet from Virginia? Where do you place this, guys? Is this an Old World wine or a New World wine? And that's going to help us, I think, get to somewhere. If we're talking about Torrontés, we're talking about South America. If we're talking about Traminet, we'd be talking about New World and probably Eastern Coast. If we're talking about Pinot Gris, we could be talking about Oregon. We could talk about Alsace. We could talk about Northern Italy, but I think we're talking more about Alsace or perhaps Oregon. If we're talking about Falangina and we're talking about Italy, you threw out, Jonathan, didn't you throw out another grape from Italy that I'm not remembering? You mentioned something else too. If it's from Virginia, Candy, are you thinking it's a Viognier blend, a Viognier itself? Are you thinking it's Treminette? Are you thinking Petit Manseng and Viognier, a blend? And I agree, Chris, on the Treminette side. I also think of it the same way. I was just going through this in my head as we were talking about the rest of the varietal potential. Torrontés and Treminette, I'm not getting enough floral to be compelled to go, and I mean like rosy floral, roses, and there is that kind of clovey element here that, and just a general mid-palate roundness that I wouldn't kind of associate with either of those. So not hoppy enough for Treminette. Cool. Reminds me of beer. Kathy says that's neat. So I'm comfortable kind of walking away from Treminette and also from Torrontés. Arnais, you think not? Probably not as tropical, that ginger element, maybe? Trying to remember Arnais. We've had one here, and I think it presented a whole bunch of lemon. And so if we're not Viognier, we're not Treminette, we're not Torrontés, and I'm not saying that we are not, but like that, if we're wheeling those things out of the picture, we're not Chardonnay, what are we? Pinot Gris. One grape that's still holding. Arnais, Falangina, Muscat. Craig, thank you for that. I meant to say that earlier. I'm going to give you 100% credit, of course. I'm not trying to steal your credit there. But Muscat would give us that orange blossom that some smelled before, that white element. Might give us some texture and the acidity. Old World Muscat. So kind of Spanish Muscat. Southern French Muscat. Jan, you would serve this with Havarti. That'd be tasty. Mm. Mm. Yeah. This has that spicy element. Michigan Auxerrois, only because it's the only place I've ever had it. That's cool. Auxerrois is what you also will find in France. Excuse me, in France, in Alsace. And I keep coming back to Alsace on this. There's that little element of spice, and that would be kind of interesting. I just looked to the right because that's where the bottle is for me. I was just doing the Chris Shirley bottle test, and it's a thin, slender, high-sided kind of Bordeaux-ish bottle that you don't typically find in Alsace, which is kind of driving me nuts. Muscat can sometimes be grapey, and that orange blossom, I'm not picking up like a whole overt orangey, orange zest, orange blossom kind of element here. Michigan Auxerrois, he has pulled the Michigan card before, or actually I pulled the Michigan card before. I'd like to do, that's possible. Kathy, you're saying Colombard. You said Colombard is Sauvignon Blanc like, perhaps, just less aromatic. And we had, did we have Colombard once? I might be confusing that. Colombard. Let's shift gears in terms of thinking about the varietal. Assuming for a moment that Tony has given us a curveball, and one that is not going to be easy, something like perhaps Colombard, just like last week where, I'm not necessarily sure I could have described, and 2 weeks ago, same thing, where just the varietal is new enough to me, a limited amount of experiences that I wouldn't have a great comfort in calling it. So maybe we're in a situation like that where, let's just say for argument's sake, per Kathy's note, it's Colombard. Where would we find that? And then does this wine showcase the characteristics of that place in the world as we would be able to deduce, right? So Summers are saying Old World and Semillon, a creamy 2% plus kind of profile from Susan. So where are we going to get this? We were back and forth on the Old World, New World. Where if I asked you not about the varietal, but I asked you what region are you going to claim for this? Sometimes we go at the varietal, and the varietal gives us a sense, and then we piggyback that varietal into a place based on the profile. Let's try it the reverse. Can we pick a region and then understand what the grapes might be in that region and then arrive at a call? And Kathy, you can always say that you really love the aromatics and flavor of this week, for sure. Dordogne does Colombard, so maybe that's the theme that's coming all together. The universe conspired to give you a class on it this morning, Susan, and to throw that all together. Marsanne Roussanne, again, grapes. Colombard, in the southwestern part of France. I don't get the Sauvignon Blanc aromatics. I don't either. I don't think this is Sauvignon Blanc. So if we're heading to the southwestern part of France, for most folks, Jonathan, you're throwing out Marsanne Roussanne for the southeastern part of France. It sounds like we're in France. And the question would be southwestern, southeastern, Alsace, on the very eastern side of things. Jan, you're throwing out Virginia or Oregon. And I tell you what, on the Virginia or Oregon side, I just think there would be a little bit more leanness. I think, and that's just, I'm not sure I can back that up. Ariel's saying New World 2, but reconsidering. Yeah, I mean, I think you could make an argument for a warm vintage. Granted, I'm not as chilled as I probably should be, or as many of you are, and so, I don't know, I think so Susan, where in southwestern France are you? From an appellation standpoint. They do Bordeaux, of course, but you're talking about further southwest, perhaps. And what are you thinking? Talk us through a note or two about what you're thinking. This is one of those great wines that that lines up exactly with my notes in the beginning about this transitional period. It's got this wonderful quality about it that you want to have with the last remnants of peaches with tomatoes and the beginning parts of squash and things. This would be a great wine for this shoulder season. The Dordogne, okay, and IGT, so a lesser kind of lack of specificity in appellation, but just a larger region that's making some interesting wines, perhaps with something like Colombard. If you guys are nailing Colombard, I'm not experienced enough to know for sure, and I'll go along if that's where you want to go. I think a Marsanne Roussanne, per Kathy's note, is not going to be as viscous, but it would be if it was much more Roussanne. So the Marsanne element, I think, would lighten this a little bit, and it's usually that way. Jan Burse is going with Colombard. Kathy's hanging with Ferment in Hungary. That's right, I forgot about that. Thank you, Kathy. You're going back to Ferment. And Ferment has a lot of these elements. Ferment is a grape that you think about being Chardonnay-like, but not with the same profile. I find it, in the few times I've had it, a little bit more angular, not quite as round in its profile. It does help to explain perhaps some of that spice. There's the Hungarian, Austrian potential. For a minute there, I was running through Riesling in my head, and whether or not we could have been picking up Alsatian Riesling or picking up even Austrian Riesling. Dry, obviously, and with some of the notes that we've mentioned, but there was that petrol comment earlier too. Jeff and Adrian are saying not green enough for Ferment. Jan likes Pinot Gris. Jan Nelson does. Jan Burse likes the Colombard idea. Susan would like to know more about Ferment. So Ferment, and by all means, Kathy, give us a little bit more of an update on that. But Ferment comes from Hungary and is also planted in Austria, around Burgenland, sort of the southeastern part of Austria. You have it where it touches on Hungary, and Herselevelu and Ferment are the two grapes that would be used to grow to make Tokai, the sweet late harvested wine that has botrytis affected. In a dry variation, I get a little bit more of a vervy continuum of acid throughout the whole thing. The acid on this is here at present, and it zings at the end. It just doesn't make an appearance much in the beginning. It's kind of like a motorcycle riding through a plume of smoke. Like you don't see it and then it comes out and that's all you hear and see. But that first part of the experience is that plume of smoke here, and that's where this fruit is. Chocolatey. I don't know, chocolatey would be a little bit brighter and not quite as round again, I think. The white pepper and nutmeg coming in. Michigan Auxerrois. So this is kind of neat. This is where we've all gone very divergent. And Chris, you're going to drink your way through this one and let everybody else do the work. We've got full spectrum of guesses, both old and new, and no real understanding, perhaps. And I think that's probably an indication that we don't really know what this is. I bet you a couple of you have come close to it. So Johnny, you're saying you're planting your flag into the old world in 2019 of varietal you've never heard of. I think that's a good, I mean, that's probably fair for how this goes, right? Kathy just chimed in. Thank you for more of an additional descriptors for ferment. It is. It's used in one of the world's greatest dessert wines. Tokai is awesome. Tokai is made in a fascinating way. As a quick aside, sorry. So botrytis affects the grapes, and they make this sugar syrup. They make a base wine that is put into a large cask, and it's 140 liters. And then they fill the cask with this base wine and then cut it with putinyosh, or buckets that are 20 liters each of this concentrate that is this nectar. And so you have a Tokai that can be anywhere from 1 to 7 putinyosh, and the 7 is called essentia because it is really just the nectar. It's 7 parts, no base wine, of this real concentration. And as you gain in more putinyosh, so a 4 putinyosh or a 5 is pretty sweet, but it has enough acidity to kind of balance out too, and it makes for a really remarkable wine. It's just a cool wine. If you haven't had one before, try to find one down. Find one out there. Jan thrown out Seyval Blanc too. I think Seyval Blanc's not much more primary than this and not quite as round. Candy's in the old world thinking Riesling, blend, low confidence. Are you throwing out the Balkans or Balkans and Macedonia, grape unknown? I like that. Susan's going to throw Colombard, Dordogne, 2019. I love that. I mean, look, come on. This is a chat that we've been doing for over a year, and you know, we started with folks who were saying like maybe Sauvignon Blanc, but I'm not positive because that's the grape I know, to throwing out 2019 Dordogne Colombard. You guys are amazing. So, Jonathan, you're hanging with a dark horse Gruner. We have a legitimate, I think, call of unknown variety in this one. Chateauneuf de Pape blend, Marsan Roussan, something crazy from Italy. We're all over the map, all over the map. So I have to, by my own promise to myself and commitment to all of you, pick something so that I can be right or wrong, with every understanding that I'm going to be wrong on this one. So I liked it kind of from the beginning. It doesn't fully describe the wine, but there is this dry and sweet profile and that spice, and I think I'm going to go Alsace Pinot Gris. I like Jan's call there. I could see it being kind of, there's a sort of field blend that happens in Alsace too, where you get Pinot Blanc, Auxerrois, you get Pinot Gris, kind of like the Austrian Gemüsersatz. I think there's a potential here for some of that in this wine. So maybe I'll just be off base fully, but I'm going to say maybe an Alsatian white blend and stick with relatively young 2018, 2019. Tran, you're in with it's pretty tasty and goes well with chicken. I agree with that. It's nice. And Pinot Gris from Oregon, coming from the McCartys. Terry guessing France, but can't place varietal. Yeah, I'm going to say Alsace 18. We have Dordogne, Colombard 19. We have 19 European but unknown. There's a whole bunch of yeah. Kathy, you're quite right on the alcohol. This is 12.7. So this is Valinka Cellars Zilavka. That's great. On the back of this label, that's fantastic. Valinka Cellars is a small family-owned and operated winery founded in 2008. That's who. What? Zilavka is a white grape variety indigenous to Bosnia-Herzegovina. And the Mostar wine region is located in the southern part of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Medium-bodied, unoaked, cool, dry, flinty, smoky with a smooth texture, slightly nutty flavors, balanced acidity. So those of you who said unknown variety, you nailed it. Because even as we talk about it, Zilavka, this is unique. It's a pretty cool wine. That is a completely new one. I've had a great week because I've gotten a chance to try two varietals that I've never heard of before. This one being one, and one that we just put onto the present menu as a pairing, Timasin, and that is a white grape variety that comes from Piedmont, and that is fabulous. And as I was tasting it with our wine representative who brought it in, I was saying to him, as we do this more and more, you create these connections, these brain synapses that help to make informed connections of, okay, I smelled white peach and floral elements and apricot, I'm thinking Viognier. So there's a connection there, right? I smell grass, grapefruit, lime, Sauvignon Blanc. Well, it has these connectors, it has these points that don't go together. Saline quality and melon and nuttiness. And they don't belong in, when you taste one thing with another thing, you're like, okay, it could be this, but it's not, and it takes you a different place. And that's what's really neat about something like this, where the world of wine has expanded so much. And maybe it was already expansive to begin with, but what we would talk about as fine wine, wine worthy of consideration, has just gotten so big. And now we're drinking a wine from Bosnia-Herzegovina and calling it legitimately all over the world, from Alsace, great Alsace, to Grüner Veltliner, to Riesling, to Pinot Gris, to potentially Torrontés from South America. It's because we don't know this wine. And eventually you get to know this wine, and perhaps wines like it are singing of a particular place. But it's a really fun wine. It is exoteric. I grant you that, Chris. I think you could definitely classify this as just more of an experience. But for some of you, it might be a wine that you like to kind of tuck into and enjoy. I think of it, even from the esoteric perspective, that it's an exercise in the palate. So, as you know, all great trainers talk about, you shouldn't do the same thing over and over. You need to give your body a bit of a jog and a shift in order to develop strength and flexibility, and doing something different helps you do that. And we just did something different in the way of blind tasting and tasting this particular wine. So, and yeah, this would fit in the Wines of War theme, which Susan has heard me talk about before and other seminars. Yes, this absolutely would. And I don't know much about the wines that are grown there, but I think it's pretty neat. And I definitely give kudos to Tony, as Johnny is too, for picking and finding a unique wine. So a fun evening for sure. Thank you, Robert, and everybody for joining us this evening. Thai barbecue chicken, yeah. Larb chicken, like, you know, the spiced chicken that's wrapped with fish sauce and ginger and lemongrass. Oh, God, that would be magnificent with this. I'd have to stop at the Thai place on the way home. Cheers, everybody. This is a fun opportunity to be together, and one I look forward to, as I've said, each and every week. I'll be back on Thursday, and we'll do it again. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.